On my 22nd birthday, my dad sold my laptop and ordered me to pay my brother's $16,800 tuition. So I left a folder on the table that shattered my family forever. I-22M. My 22nd birthday arrived on a quiet evening, and instead of receiving warm wishes or even a simple happy birthday, I got a message that changed my life forever. At 7:43 p.m., just as I was finishing my long shift at the warehouse, my phone vibrated. I glanced down expecting something normal, maybe even a small apology from my father for forgetting my birthday earlier. Instead, the words on the screen cut me deeper than I ever expected. The message read, "Sold your laptop. Your brother needed a new watch. Be grateful we feed you. Also, you'll pay his tuition $16,800 by Friday." For a full minute I could not move. My hands shook, my stomach felt hollow, and my heart pounded against my chest. That laptop was not just an item sitting on a desk. It was the symbol of 8 months of struggle, where I had worked endless shifts, skipped lunches, and pushed my body beyond its limits just to save enough money. It was mine alone, paid for by sweat and sacrifice, and now it was gone, sold without a word of consideration, just to fund my younger brother's luxuries. And to make the wound deeper, my father's message wasn't written with any regret or explanation. Instead, he spoke to me like I was a burden, telling me to be grateful that they still fed me, as if I were a stranger living off their charity instead of their own son who had been contributing to household expenses since I was 16. But the real blow was at the end. He ordered me to pay my brother's college tuition by Friday, as if my bank account existed for his convenience. $16,800. He tossed the number into the message like it was a small favor, a casual demand. My jaw tightened, and for the first time in my life, I realized this was not just another instance of favoritism. It was the final straw that snapped the rope I had been holding on to for years. I typed back 2 words, "No chance." My hands were still shaking as I pressed send. His reply came within seconds, cold and brutal. He said if I would not do as ordered, then I could leave the house. I was cut off from family support, from shelter, from everything. His words should have frightened me, but instead I felt something surprising. Relief. Pure, quiet relief. I realized I had been planning for this more than I admitted. For 2 years I had been saving, preparing, slowly gathering not only money but also something far more powerful. Evidence. Evidence that would one day show the truth of what my parents had done. That night, I returned home in silence. I did not argue. I did not shout. I moved through the house like a ghost. 2 duffel bags were enough to hold everything I owned. A sad reminder of how little I had been allowed to accumulate in a home that was supposed to be mine too. While everyone slept, I gathered the items that truly belonged to me. But before I walked out, I sat at the kitchen table and pulled out a folder I had been hiding for months. A folder that contained the entire truth. Inside were bank statements, financial records, and documents that revealed a secret my parents had no idea I had discovered. For years, they had told me that there was no college fund for me, that I needed to work myself to the bone if I wanted an education. But that was a lie. When my brother and I were born, my grandparents had created education trusts for each of us. Every birthday, every Christmas, they deposited money. And when they passed away 3 years ago, they left additional sums specifically for our education. Each fund held $50,000. It should have been more than enough to give both of us a future. But while my brother's fund remained protected, mine was slowly drained. I discovered that my money had paid for his private high school tuition, his car, his hobbies, and now they planned to use what remained for his college. Meanwhile, they forced me to work endless shifts while convincing me that I had no support. They robbed me of my opportunities and stole from a fund that was never theirs to touch. My folder held everything. Photocopies of the trust, records of withdrawals, proof that the money was designated for me alone. But that was not all. I also found that my father had been claiming me as a dependent on his taxes, receiving benefits for supporting me even while charging me rent and demanding I pay household bills. He profited from my existence while treating me like a burden. Before leaving, I placed on the table a neatly organized stack of documents with highlights, notes, and a cover letter explaining exactly what I had found. At the bottom, I left a formal demand for the return of my education fund, along with compensation for the rent and bills I had paid while being claimed as a dependent. The total amount reached over $73,000. Next to it, I left copies of emails I had already sent, one to the IRS regarding tax fraud, and another to the estate lawyer who managed my grandparents' trust. And finally, I left the most important document of all, proof that I had already filed a court case demanding the return of my fund. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I walked out of that house forever. My bags were heavy, but my heart felt light. For the first time, I was free from their control. I closed the door behind me without a sound, knowing that the next morning my family's perfect illusion would shatter. And shatter it did. By the time the sun rose, my phone was exploding with calls. My mother's voice was broken with tears, begging me to come home, saying we could work this out. I ignored her. Then came my father, his voice shifting from confused to furious to desperate. My brother called too, his voice panicked, demanding to know what I had done. Furious that his future was now falling apart because his college fund was nearly empty. He screamed about how I had ruined his life, but I only smiled bitterly at the irony. For years, my life had been sacrificed for his comfort, and now he finally felt what it meant to lose something. That day, my phone never stopped buzzing. Extended relatives reached out too. Some tried to guilt me. Others quietly admitted they had always suspected something was wrong. The family web was already trembling under the weight of truth, and I knew this was only the beginning. The first week after I walked away felt like a lifetime. I was settled into my small studio apartment, a place I had secretly secured weeks earlier with the savings I had managed to hide from my parents. It was tiny, just a bed, a table, and a little kitchen, but to me it felt like a palace. For the first time in my life, I could breathe without feeling someone's hand around my neck. But that sense of freedom was constantly interrupted by the endless calls and messages from my family. My father showed up at my workplace only 2 days after I left. He stormed into the warehouse, his voice echoing as he shouted my name. He demanded that I drop everything and return home, that I stop the legal process before I destroyed the family. His rage was so loud that security had to escort him out. My supervisor, the same man who had taught me how to read financial records and guided me through the discovery of my parents' lies, warned him that any further harassment would lead to a restraining order. My father left that day furious, his face red with panic, and that image burned into my mind as proof that the tables had finally turned. Meanwhile, my mother's messages filled my phone daily. Some were guilt trips, painting me as the villain who tore the family apart. Others were desperate pleas, begging me to reconsider, saying they had always planned to pay me back. But those words carried no weight anymore. If they had truly wanted to pay me back, they would never have spent years taking from me in silence. They had choices, and every choice they made was against me. My brother's reaction was the most explosive. His panic grew every day. Without access to my education fund, he could no longer afford his first-choice university. His calls were filled with anger and threats, accusing me of ruining his life, as if his comfort was more important than my right to a future. What he could not understand was that I no longer cared. I had spent too many years watching him receive opportunities while I was told to work harder. I was finished being the sacrifice. By the end of the first week, the situation escalated further. The lawyer handling my grandparents' estate called me personally. He said my parents had come to his office trying to argue that the education trust was never meant specifically for my college costs, but instead for family expenses. He laughed them out of the room. He told me that the paperwork was clear, the money was for my education, and their actions were a direct violation of the trust. He commended me for standing up for myself and assured me that legally I was on strong ground. What stung the most during that call was learning something I did not know before. My parents had tried to access my brother's fund too, but he had placed extra restrictions on his account after noticing irregularities with mine. They targeted me because my money was easier to take. That realization made the betrayal burn even deeper. They had chosen to sacrifice me because I was the easier victim. The second week brought even more developments. The IRS sent official notice to my parents' address, confirming that the investigation into fraudulent tax filings was active. My father called me 17 times that day alone, leaving voicemails that shifted from rage to desperation. The reality of facing penalties and possible criminal charges had finally hit him, and he was terrified. My mother continued to cry over the phone, pleading for me to think about the family. But for the first time in my life, I was thinking about myself. During this period, my brother made a different attempt. Instead of screaming or threatening, he called me with a softer tone, claiming he wanted to apologize. He spent an hour explaining how my actions were ruining his future, how his girlfriend was disappointed in him, how he would now have to attend community college instead of the prestigious university he had dreamed of. I listened quietly until he finished, then asked him one simple question. Where was this concern for my future when you enjoyed everything paid for by my fund? His silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. The following weeks were filled with more chaos from my parents. They tried to turn extended family against me, painting me as ungrateful and heartless. But to their surprise, several relatives took my side. My aunt from my mother's side even called me to say she had always wondered how my parents could claim to be struggling financially while my brother went to private schools and had the latest gadgets. She told me she admired my courage and that if I ever needed support, she would be there. For the first time, I felt what it was like to have real family. Not people who used me, but people who stood beside me. 2 months later, the court hearing arrived. Standing in that room, hearing the judge speak, I finally saw justice take shape. The judge was harsh with my parents, condemning them for stealing from a child's education fund, especially one created by grandparents who trusted them to protect it. The court ordered the return of my full education fund, with interest, bringing the total to just over $58,000. That money was placed safely back into my control, where it always belonged. My father's separate tax fraud case remained ongoing, but his accountant warned him that penalties would be severe. The IRS did not take lightly to fraud, and my father's pattern of using me as a dependent while charging me rent was more than enough evidence of abuse. My brother ended up enrolling in the local community college because without my money, they could not afford anything else. Perhaps it was the first time in his life he had to face reality without being handed everything on a silver plate. Meanwhile, my own life transformed completely. My tiny apartment felt like freedom. My warehouse job led to a promotion, and my supervisor became a mentor who guided me not only in work but in life. With my restored education fund, I enrolled in community college and excelled, making the dean's list and preparing to transfer to university with a scholarship. For the first time, my future was truly mine. My mother tried one last desperate attempt to pull me back. She waited in the lobby of my apartment building for hours until I came home from work. When she saw me, she fell apart in tears, begging me to stop the legal process. She said they had only taken my education money temporarily and always planned to pay it back. She said they just wanted to give my brother a better chance in life. I looked at her and felt nothing but clarity. I told her that intentions did not erase theft, and years of choices had proven where their loyalty truly lay. She left crying that night, but I did not waver. Months passed, and slowly the noise from my parents faded. They realized I could not be manipulated back into silence. The judge's words still echoed in my head. Parents who steal from their children's future do not deserve sympathy. My brother struggled at community college. My father faced consequences for his fraud, and my mother lived with the reality that her favoritism had cost her a son. As for me, I built a new life. I excelled in my studies, I made new friends, and I reconnected with relatives who actually cared for me. I learned that family is not always the people who share your blood. Sometimes it is the people who respect you, support you, and believe in your worth. On my 22nd birthday, I thought I had lost everything. But in reality, that day was the beginning of my freedom. Because sometimes, the best gift you can ever give yourself is the strength to walk away from people who never valued you. And that day, I finally walked into a life that belonged entirely to me.